Okay, so Fabian, thank you very much for talking to me today. I know that what we're talking about, the ethics of electric cars, is very important for a lot of the people who are watching this, who will be moving into engineering roles. But I should also say at the beginning of our discussion that as I've prepared for this and communicated with you, my understanding of the range of ethical issues that are associated with electric cars broadened significantly. I was familiar with discussion around ethical choices that might be made if a car is heading into an accident with an automatic a self-driving car. But the range of issues associated with electrical cars I wasn't so familiar with. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. I thought I would start. You're from the RAND Corporation, and I know what that is, but many others won't who are watching this. So I thought I'd just ask you to describe RAND for the people watching.
Yeah, no problem. The RAND Corporation is a nonprofit organization that aims to provide research and analysis to sponsors. We've been around since the 1940s, so we've been around even towards the end of the World War II. We're kind of the first think tank to get up and running, and we own. We have the contract for 4 FFRDCs, which are federally funded research and development sensors. So we operate one for the U.S. Army, one for U.S. Air Force, one for the Office of Secretary of Defense, and U.S. Department of Homeland Security. But that makes up about half the revenue for RAND. The other half is policy oriented in terms of education, labor, healthcare, and other issues like transportation, climate change, and that sort of stuff. And then the RAND Corporation also has its own graduate school called the Party RAND Graduate School, and it was one of the first institutions to be able to grant a PhD in public policy.
Very interesting, and I think people who work at RAND seem to have very interesting roles in the sense that the research you're doing is making a very direct contribution to decisions that are being made at a government level in the US and perhaps elsewhere. And so that the advice that you give, that the research that you're doing is very much going to affect the world, perhaps more so than some others.
That's entirely possible. So that's it. It's a great. It does take some ethical gravitas in order to be in a position like that, and you got to take that responsibility seriously.
Absolutely. So you're an engineer. You studied materials science and chemical engineering. How did your career lead you into a policy role?
Yeah, I had a bit of a zigzag pathway here. But I did some research as an undergrad in chemical engineering, and once I graduated, I spent 5 years between undergrad and grad school working in industry, and I got introduced to a manufacturing environment and then an R&D environment, and was at a startup for a little bit, but that went the way of startups and went kaputs. And so I decided to go back to grad school, but with a greater interest in lithium-ion batteries and capacitors. What got me interested in policy, though, is just kind of a personal interest in military history and military strategy and that sort of things. And once you read enough of those types of books, the RAND Corporation starts getting mentioned over and over again. And so it was sometime during grad school when I realized, hey, this organization needs engineers. I'm an engineer. Material science is not as large as the other engineering disciplines, and so it might be I might have a kind of a niche expertise that could be utilized. And so I ended up trying to grab some public policy fellowships, joined a science to policy group at my university, University of Riverside, University of California, Riverside. And after working for a bit, made the switch over to RAND.
And I'm sure you provide, a lot of value there, being able to combine engineering with policy. So we're talking today about electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and the ethics that are associated with you. But you work also in many other areas. I thought I'd ask you to begin by talking about the strategic importance of electric vehicles today, why most developed countries are keen to encourage them.
Yeah, it's all driven by climate change, and the policies around the world are aiming to reduce carbon emissions as much as possible, and electrifying their fleets, whether it's transportation or consumer driven. Those fleets are one of the easiest ways to tackle carbon reduction. Now there's countries all over the world are reacting and trying to phase out sales of internal combustion engines, or to limit the registration of new internal combustion engine vehicles. The EU announced that a 2035 ban. Norway has one of the earliest bans coming up in 2025. So much sooner, and Norway's been a very interesting location to track the progress of electric vehicle market share and growth and gain. In the U.S., progress is a little bit slower, but California is kind of leading the way in terms of trying to push the rest of the country towards something of a similar type of situation. But the U.S. also has a couple of other initiatives as well.
So, in encouraging the use of electric vehicles, countries are providing rebates to purchasers. This has been an issue in the U.S. Initially, vehicle prices made it so that they were only available to well-off people. Can you talk about the equity and ethics issues with electric vehicle purchase incentives?
Yeah, so this is a policy concern because you want the most bang for your buck when it comes to these rebates, right? If you're going to be spending taxpayers' hard-earned money, you want it to pay off. So ideally, you would want to target the least efficient, most carbon emitting vehicles to be replaced, right? But when you give it a generic rebate, it's the people who have a surplus income that are going to be ones that are able to spend the money to buy a new car. Most folks buy used cars. At least that's how the demographics work out in the U.S. So until EVs grab enough market share to begin reselling to second owners, third owners, maybe even fourth time owners, it's the folks who are buying the new cars who are going to get those incentives, those rebates, and those happen to be higher educated, higher income, white families, and that just happens to be the demographic, right? These are the folks that can afford the newer, more efficient, less carbon emitting vehicles. So you have a double negative going on. You got the cars that are the folks that are gaining these rebates are replacing higher efficiency, less carbon emitting vehicles. So you're not actually targeting the right cross section of vehicles that you'd want to replace. The other thing is that even though EVs are likely to have a lower cost of ownership over the lifetime of the vehicle than an internal combustion engine or a gas-powered, diesel-powered car, they have higher upfront costs than equivalent cars. So the other part of that is that rebates are only accessible after you file your taxes. So it makes it a little bit harder for folks with lower incomes to take advantage of a rebate, because they need to be able to survive until that rebate comes in at the end of the year. So they need to save up front, save up more for a higher down payment, or take on higher monthly payments to afford the EVs. And sometimes that calculus isn't very obvious, or sometimes they just don't have that extra income to be able to do that. This kind of arises. This problem kind of gets exacerbated a bit by the business strategy of EV automakers. There's quite a few EV makers that are deliberately targeting the high-end luxury vehicle market first, because that's where they have highest margins, and of course that's fine. That's a fine business strategy. But the only folks who can afford those vehicles are the high-income households. But after the automakers get that steady revenue stream, then they start to focus on the lower price, more accessible vehicle designs and market. But at the end, so they kind of exacerbate some of these issues a bit, just in the way they approach their business strategy. And then lastly, with the rebate incentives, the way that it's worked out the first time around, these incentives have been redesigned in light of these inequity issues. And so the most recent large piece of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, has reintroduced federal rebates to make it so that EVs need to be. They've split the rebate in half. 50% of it is determined on EVs being manufactured in the U.S., and then the other half of the rebate is to make sure the materials are sourced from the U.S. or an acceptable trade nation, partner trading nation.
Fascinating, and illustrates the complexity of trying to encourage a change from one type of vehicle to another, and really, the challenges of doing that within a market where the car companies are rightly focused, probably from their point of view, on the higher end of the market, but at the same time, that raises some of the challenges that you're suggesting, as well as other challenges there. So I think it's very, very interesting to consider something that at first appeared quite simple, a subsidy to encourage more people to buy electric cars, but it isn't really as simple as that. It's really very interesting. Okay, so another element as far as electric cars are concerned is the charging infrastructure that is being developed and clearly is necessary to grow the use of electric vehicles. What do you see as the issues with this?
This is another demand side problem, right? A private operator of charging infrastructure is likely to make an investment in building out a charging station where demand is greatest, right? And so that means all the folks that are near is building it out near the geographic area with the most EV owners, which we already know tends to skew towards a particular demographic, right? So that means that EV owners outside that geographic location, well-to-do neighborhoods and that sort and highly urban areas, then they would have a tough time finding where to charge their vehicle, and so this is another disincentive for consumers to make the switch to EVs, right? And that's a place where policy can try and shape things as they evolve. There was some funding in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that got passed in 2021 that provides about, I think it's $7 billion in funding to help build out a national highway charging infrastructure that to allow folks to get from one place to another without having to depend on wherever the private market is shaping those incentives for investment.
And so this also allows us to think about, as a change like this is being made, the market is behaving in a particular way that's causing emphasis in some areas, like well-to-do neighborhoods, as far as charging infrastructures are concerned, and it prompts discussion of what the government's role might be policy-wise to try and ensure that that infrastructure is more spread more evenly and is supporting the development and use purchase of electric cars in other neighborhoods.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you want everybody to make the switch, they need to know that they have a place to charge, and you need to lower those range anxieties.
Very interesting economic questions there around market performance or market behavior and the role that government might have there. Very interesting. Okay, so electric vehicles also have batteries, as we know. They're made from critical minerals that involve important questions around environmental justice. So can you talk about the questions that there are there?
Sure. So I'll start by explaining or defining what a critical mineral is. In the U.S., the definition comes if it meets two criteria. Either there's a single domestic supplier of that mineral, or there's a combination of the mineral being used by industries with very low profitability but high importance to economic and national security. And combined with that, the consumption of that mineral is based on imports from countries that might be unwilling or unable to continue supplying the U.S. So it's one of those two: a single domestic supplier or the combination there that I just mentioned. The USGS also has a methodology to calculate the criticality, the degree of criticality of a mineral. The USGS is the U.S. Geological Survey, and so they came up with they used this methodology to come up with a list of 50 minerals, and on there are a list of are the rare earths, which are also important for magnets, which go into electric motors, right? And then of course there's 4 lithium-ion batteries materials included on that list: lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite. So what's the issue? Well, these things need to come out of the ground somehow, right? There's depending on the process, some ways are more clean and less polluting than others, some more so. In the processing of these materials, when you try to turn these dirt into value-added specialty chemicals, those have a lot of waste streams associated with them as well. And then, those specialty chemicals themselves also get used to create the materials used in battery anodes and cathodes. And they also have their own waste streams associated with them as well. And a lot of harsh chemical inputs as well. Some of these extraction and processing methods also use a lot of water. So local. So if this is being done in an area with not a whole lot of access to a water supply or a dwindling supply, or a single supply that could be easily polluted, then you're going to get concerned, right? This has been the case in Chile, in Bolivia, Peru, Argentina. There's plenty of indigenous populations near these types of deposits that want to make sure that they have enough water for their own use, and at the same time, that the waste streams that are being produced do not pollute those water supplies as well. And as the U.S., the EU, and others are trying to onshore more extraction and processing, to help meet the demand of the growing electric vehicle market. These same concerns are being echoed domestically as well, whether it's tribal communities in the U.S. or just small town folks that want to make sure that their local supply stays clean. So, but the good news is that there's ways to make the extraction and processing a bit more sustainable, and that's the big focus for policymakers that are looking to increase the extraction of these minerals to meet that demand. But it's got to be enforced. It's got to be written in such a way that there's some bite to the legislation. Otherwise, this type of practices will just continue. So it's these decision makers, for policy, that are being forced to weigh interests at the granular level, the community stakeholders, and weigh that against the wider global priority to combat climate change. And so that's an ethical dilemma if I ever saw one.
Fascinating. Just this major change in automotive, in the automotive world, and all of the implications that this has got. I mean, when we first think about it, we think about it as a technology-based change that is simply, changing the engine in the car, perhaps. But that's not. But what you're describing is that it's a lot more complicated than that. There are a lot more implications that we have to consider. And there's one more that I wanted to mention as far as electric cars go before we move on to autonomous vehicles. And those are the cybersecurity issues that are associated with electric vehicles. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Like any electronic device that's connected to the internet, there's going to be cybersecurity issues, whether it's an app that connects your car to your phone, the payment method to an EV charging equipment, if it's the charging cable connected to your car, from the station to your car, if it's the charging equipment connected to the grid, all those points are all those are entry points and vulnerabilities for a hacker, right? And so, if you want to talk about a little bit more in detail, in terms of cyber attack, there's a false data injection attack on FTIA, which could result in the overcharging of batteries and lead to damage in the battery itself, or if that battery is connected to the grid, vis-a-vis grid level storage for renewables and solar, right? There's also man-in-the-middle attacks. These could have tracking. These could create tracking issues, payment fraud, violating personal privacy, personal data. It could also lead to intentional overcharging and discharging of batteries in the vehicle, and causing damage and degrading the vehicle's overall capacity and capability. Man in the middle could also cause overload. Could also overload distribution transformers, and sometimes that power grid frequency and the voltage stability, leading to a grid failure if it's large enough. And then but to do that, you'd have to take control over a very large number of EVs. And then all that has safety concerns associated with it too, right? Next is denial of service, DOS attacks, and you could essentially shut down charging stations to customers, and if emergency responders start switching their vehicles to electric, then all of a sudden they no longer have access to reliable energy source, right? And then lastly, there's malware injection, which could also result in theft of payment information, but that's credit card information. They could mess with the total amounts. There's personal information associated with that, and then charging information as well. And then there's potential for this malware to spread throughout the network of EV support equipment, supply equipment, the batteries, the management systems, and then the power grid that those are all connected to, which has helped spread it from one place to another.
Fascinating. And I'm sure there are other issues that we could consider, but we considered as we were looking at what we would talk about today, that the ones we've talked about are probably the main ones. But I also wanted to talk about autonomous vehicles. And we've seen ethical aspects of the safety vulnerabilities in that technology. Including that some people have argued that the elements of autonomy that we're seeing already in cars like Tesla's may have been enabled too early. So what do you see as the ethical questions with autonomous vehicles, and how should we address them?
On the safety side of stuff, I'd like to highlight some work done by my colleagues here at RAND. Needy Kalra and David Groves had an excellent report come out a few years ago that did some modeling of the policy implications for allowing highly automated vehicles onto roads that compared slightly safer vehicles to near perfect safety in terms of safety. And they compared the relative numbers of 10%, 75% better, and 90% safer than human drivers. And what they found was kind of counterintuitive. They found that if waiting for a vehicle to prove that it's safer and much closer to perfection actually led to more road fatalities in the long run. Compared to just letting a vehicle that was only 10% better, and this is because you might end up waiting for so long for the technology to reach that level of acceptable safety performance that fatalities from car accidents just from human drivers just add up faster than what you see what you're trying to save waiting for that guarantee of higher safety. This kind of points out that hey, maybe we should maybe, even though these incidents from Tesla and other places are getting lots of news and media coverage, maybe in the grand scheme of things they are actually in fact saving more lives cumulatively, right? And so in light of that evidence, here's another ethical dilemma for decision makers, right? Do I let a car that I know could be safer onto the road? For many people, we instinctively want to say no, right? For some reason, we're perfectly fine accepting the death that results from human error, but not so for computer or robot error, right? For some reason, folks just don't like that. And I think this is, if you want to look at the utilitarian type of perspective and look at total number of lives saved, then you might need to have a serious discussion in terms of changing public perception of these risks, and the public debate needs to better reflect this type of evidence.
Very interesting, the different attitudes we've got to human error versus machine error, and very important, very interesting. But vehicle automation also impacts jobs in many areas, including people who are paid to drive both cars and trucks, but also in other areas. Can you talk about the impact in that field as far as jobs are concerned, and what the responses might be to that?
Yeah, I think there's legitimate concern in terms of job, but I think it might play out slightly different than most folks think. I think the impacts might be slightly overstated, because certainly professional drivers are going to be affected by this type of thing, but they'll adapt, right? Because when you really start thinking about the implementation of these things, of autonomous vehicles, whether it's a tractor trailer, doing in long haul trucking, from going from one place to another, you start thinking about all the little intangibles that you really don't consider when you're first deploying these things. In order to replace a person, an autonomous truck or other vehicle has to have all the safety features to avoid collisions, stay in lanes, right, all that stuff. But if you got a malign actor that knows this, right, then they can start to game those safety features a bit. They could actually leverage them to their own advantage. So you could imagine someone putting up a roadblock, and an autonomous tractor trailer detects that and sees something in the road, starts slowing down, comes to a complete stop out of safety concerns, and then these malicious actors, go out and raid the back of the truck for whatever's inside. So just imagine an Amazon delivery van, right? Instead of targeting the boxes on people's porches, maybe they'll just target the vans themselves if there's nobody inside there. So I think you'll start to you'll still need to keep some humans in the loop. Even if the vehicle is completely capable of getting from point A to point B safely without less accidents and all that stuff, just because of these little situations that we may not have considered before deploying them. So instead, I think what if we take the Amazon analogy a little bit further, instead I think you'll see a different place for humans in human machine teaming kind of way. Maybe you'll see like the Amazon van driving down the street, and it makes the appropriate stop, and wait for the person to jump off, make the delivery, get back on, and then continue on its way. Or maybe the person is inside, loading up drones to deliver them from the van to the porch and back or something. So people will still be in the loop. People will still have a role, just because you can't automate everything, at least not in the near term. But anyway, this is just one example. In a highly dense urban area, the deterrent or incentives might be a bit different. If you have enough population density to focus eyes on these types of autonomous vehicles, and you might see some differences there, right? If you logistics and long haul trucking compared to more mobility on demand, mobility as a service, the Ubers and taxis of the world, right? They might be slightly different in terms of how jobs play out. And so, certainly there's going to be a need for retraining programs, and there's probably a place for private-public partnerships that can help alleviate some of those labor concerns.
Very interesting. I've only got one more question, and it is: many of the people who'll be watching this will be joining the workforce in engineering roles where there'll be ethical implications of the decisions that they make. Have you got any advice that you'd like to leave them with?
I would say don't shy away from it. Right. Personally, I love philosophy, and I think most engineers will like science fiction, and so philosophy definitely plays a role in that. And psychoanalysis is kind of fun, but a bit outdated. But these two areas I think are kind of interesting to get us to help us provide with great arenas for playing out these dilemmas and scenarios, right? I would definitely encourage engineers to delve into ethics and moral philosophy. I can recommend a couple books if you want. There's a title, What We Owe Each Other, is an interesting read. I'd throw in maybe some Nietzsche, genealogy of morals and beyond good and evil, that sort of stuff. It really gets you thinking about moral qualms and how we consider where our behavior comes from. But also the other consideration needs to be done in terms of at the systems level, right? Like we were talking about with the critical minerals, it's not just the technology after it gets into the consumer's hand that has ethical dilemmas. It's the entire supply chain behind it as well, and how those impacts affect folks around the world. So it's a hardware and the hardware and software products that engineers are going to be designing and building will have impacts across the board. So a systems thinking framework is needed to have that broad perspective. And then, even as technology gets crazier and crazier, once it gets integrated with the body and brain, the very nature of like free will itself might start to have real world ramifications. You can just think about how society views free will and how that affects our justice system, right? But anyways, at the end of the day, ethics are highly tied to values, which do vary from culture to culture, right? It's not exactly moral relativism, but you do need to have a different perspective, and reading up on different cultures and their histories should help inform folks. But not just that. That also includes their geographic and socioeconomic class, and comparing those values to one another. So that means even more reading on class and ethnic struggles, right? And then at the end of the day, if you want to throw in some behavior economics and game theory, that'll probably help too.
I mean, as I've talked to you today, it seems to me very clear that you've moved and read well beyond material science and chemical engineering into the areas that you've just mentioned, particularly around ethics and philosophy, and economics has also been there. But the idea that when we're considering a technical change of any kind, in this case, we've used the example almost of electric cars and autonomous vehicles, but really the systems approach that you've taken to this is one that always has to be considered when a technical change of any kind is contemplated. And to me, the value of what you've had to say is of course, first around the understanding it gives us about electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, but also moves into that broader question of how we deal with technical change. And I think it's a great case study to illustrate, how we should think about that. So, I really appreciate you talking to me. I think it's got great value for the people who will watch it that are, going to be moving into careers where they're making technical changes. And so, thank you for doing it. I'm very appreciative.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me to have this discussion. I love talking about this stuff.